The life of Nehemiah is a good example of how to defeat discouragement in our lives. We're talking about defeating discouragement because specifically as Americans during this specific season between Thanksgiving and New Year's, many of us report living with higher levels of anxiety, higher levels of discouragement, and higher levels of depression. And as a Jesus follower, those are things we don't have to be plagued by. We don't have to be tormented by those things. We have a Savior who came to give us peace. And so we don't have to live with discouragement. So we've been looking at Nehemiah as he has come back to Israel to rebuild his home and rebuild his home city and rebuild the defensive wall that protects it all. And while he's doing that, we get to chapter 6. It's a great example for us of something very specific you can do to help defeat discouragement. In chapter 6, Nehemiah actually calls out and gives names to the people that are doing the discouraging in his life. Their names are Sanballat, Tobiah, and Geshem. And during this time of rebuilding, Sanballat, Tobiah, and Geshem are constantly threatening, mocking, sending letters, sending formal declarations, and just being imposing and discouraging Nehemiah. And so Nehemiah calls them out. He identifies them as he is building this wall. This is a really important thing to do in your life if you're going to defeat discouragement. Identify the things or the people that are discouraging you. And it can be different for all of us. For me, a long time ago, I identified that two of the most discouraging things in my life I was allowing into my life. They were social media and TV news. I used to watch a whole lot of TV news, and I used to spend a whole lot of time on social media, and I discovered that those two things were very discouraging to me. And so once I identified that, now I could devise a plan of action to keep them out. I could build a boundary, build a wall to keep those things out. So I don't do social media, and I very, very seldomly watch TV news. Those are just what I have identified for me. I have identified some things that discourage me, and I have done some things to actively keep them out. I've built a wall around my life to keep them out. So one of the most important things you can do if you want to defeat the discouragement in your life is identify what's discouraging you. Sometimes they're people, like in Nehemiah's case. Sometimes they're things, like in my case. But they're probably different for you. You probably have your own set of unique discouragers. It's important that you identify them, give them a name, point them out, and call them out. And then do what Nehemiah did. Build a wall around yourself. Don't let those discouraging things and people in. Build boundaries to keep the discouragement out. It's an interesting thing that Nehemiah had to build a wall to defeat discouragement, and sometimes we might too. Setting healthy boundaries around discouraging people is a good thing for you. You get to choose how you spend your time, and you don't have to spend your time surrounded by discouraging things or discouraging people. Now, at the end of chapter 6, Nehemiah tells us that an amazing thing happened. At the end of just 52 days, this massive wall around Jerusalem was rebuilt. This is astonishing. Walls were made with stone and plaster and mud brick, and it was a huge task to build a wall around a city. And for these people returning home to rebuild the city wall in just 52 days was an absolute miracle. And Nehemiah says, when our enemies saw that we had rebuilt the wall so quickly, they were astonished, and they realized that God was with us. It's an important thing to identify who your discouragers are, build that wall around yourself so that they can't get in, and sooner or later they're going to realize God is with you. Maybe it's just an important reminder for you that God is with you, regardless of who or what is discouraging you. You begin to identify them, you begin to build boundaries. God will help you, and that discouragement will be a lot less in your life. I hope that you can live today with an identification of your discouragers, with a boundary to keep them out, and then enjoy the peace that comes from defeating discouragement. Bye.